In just 29 seconds, America watched their FBI director destroy his own credibility. Kash Patel didn't hesitate. He didn't think. He just answered. Senator Jeff Merkley asked one simple Constitution question. Cameras captured Patel's confident response. What did this Oregon senator ask that made the nation's top law enforcement officer reveal he didn't understand the document he swore to defend? March 8, 2025, 3:42 p.m. The Dirksen Senate Office Building's room 236 crackled with the kind of tension that only comes when constitutional principles collide with political ambition. Senator Jeff Merkley walked in carrying nothing but a small pocket constitution, the same kind given to every American citizen at naturalization ceremonies. His gray hair was slightly disheveled from the Oregon wind that morning, his blue suit wrinkled from a long day of hearings, but his eyes held the sharp focus of someone who'd discovered something that would shake the foundations of American law enforcement. Across the witness table sat Kash Patel, FBI director for exactly 73 days, his dark suit immaculate, his red tie perfectly knotted, his confidence radiating from weeks of friendly media appearances where no one had dared to test his actual knowledge of constitutional law. The mahogany-paneled room buzzed with the electric energy of C-SPAN cameras and whispered conversations among staffers who sensed something significant was about to unfold. The hearing had been scheduled as routine FBI oversight, budget discussions, operational updates, standard congressional theater. Patel had prepared for softball questions about bureau efficiency and counterterrorism initiatives. His briefing binders were organized by topic, his talking points memorized from weeks of friendly Fox News interviews. What he hadn't prepared for was facing an Oregon senator who'd spent the previous weekend reading every constitutional law case involving FBI authority and had discovered something deeply disturbing about the current director's understanding of the limits of federal power. Director Patel, Merkley began, his voice carrying the measured cadence of someone who'd taught constitutional law before entering politics. Thank you for joining us today to discuss the FBI's role in protecting constitutional rights. Behind the senator sat two constitutional law professors from Georgetown, taking detailed notes. Patel responded confidently, "Thank you, Senator Merkley. I'm honored to lead an agency that has spent over a century protecting the American people while respecting their constitutional rights." The Republican senators nodded approvingly. Everything seemed routine. Director Patel, Merkley continued, pulling out his pocket constitution, "You've taken an oath to support and defend the Constitution. I assume you're familiar with its contents?" The question seemed basic, almost insulting. "Of course," Senator Patel replied confidently. "The Constitution is the foundation of everything we do at the FBI." But Merkley wasn't interested in textbook answers. Which article of the Constitution establishes the FBI? The question seemed straightforward for someone leading federal law enforcement. Director Patel, Merkley continued, pulling out his pocket constitution and placing it deliberately on the table where cameras could capture every detail. "You've taken an oath to support and defend the Constitution. I assume you're familiar with its contents?" The question seemed almost insultingly basic, the kind of softball inquiry that should have been easy for any federal official to handle. Patel's slight smile suggested he thought Merkley was wasting valuable hearing time with elementary civics questions. "Of course, Senator," Patel replied with the confidence of someone who'd never been seriously challenged on constitutional knowledge. "The Constitution is the foundation of everything we do at the FBI. Every investigation, every arrest, every search warrant must comply with constitutional requirements." It was a textbook answer, the kind of response that would satisfy most congressional questioners and move the hearing toward more substantive operational matters. But Merkley wasn't interested in textbook answers. He was interested in testing whether the FBI director actually understood the constitutional principles he claimed to defend. "Excellent, Director. Then you'll have no trouble explaining the constitutional basis for FBI authority. Which article of the Constitution establishes the FBI?" The question seemed straightforward, almost elementary for someone leading federal law enforcement, but something in Merkley's tone suggested hidden depths. Patel's confident expression flickered for just a moment as he processed the question. Something about Merkley's delivery suggested this wasn't as simple as it appeared. Senator, the FBI operates under Article 2, Executive Powers, and various congressional authorizations under Article 1. It was a reasonable response that demonstrated basic knowledge of constitutional structure, but there was something in his delivery that suggested uncertainty beneath the surface confidence. Director Patel, Merkley said, his voice taking on the precision of a constitutional law professor who'd caught a student in a fundamental misunderstanding. I'm going to ask you a very specific question, and I want you to take your time before answering. He opened his pocket constitution to a specific page, marked with a yellow sticky note that had clearly been placed there with deliberate preparation. Does the Constitution explicitly mention federal law enforcement agencies? The question hung in the air like a trap, waiting to be sprung. Patel's brow furrowed slightly as he considered the implications. This wasn't the kind of operational question his staff had prepared him for during their extensive briefing sessions. This was pure constitutional law, the kind of foundational knowledge that should be second nature to anyone wielding federal police power. The cameras zoomed in on his face as he realized he was entering uncharted territory. Patel paused, sensing danger. Senator, while the Constitution doesn't specifically mention the FBI by name, it grants Congress the authority to— That's not what I asked. Yes or no? Merkley's voice was firm. Senator, the Constitution provides the framework. The answer is no. Merkley cut him off with authority. The Constitution does not explicitly mention federal law enforcement agencies. The FBI exists because Congress chose to create it using implied powers, not constitutional mandate. The room's temperature seemed to shift as the significance became clear. If the FBI's existence depended on implied rather than explicit constitutional authority, then its powers were far more limited and subject to congressional oversight than most people realized. Patel's confident facade began to crack as he grasped that his understanding of his own agency's constitutional foundation was fundamentally flawed. Now, Director Patel, Merkley continued, sensing his advantage, since the FBI derives its authority from implied congressional powers rather than explicit constitutional mandate. Can you tell me what constitutional principles limit FBI authority? It was the kind of question that should have been central to any FBI director's training, but Patel's increasingly uncomfortable expression suggested he'd never seriously considered the constitutional constraints on his power. Patel attempted to recover. Senator, the Fourth Amendment protects against unreasonable searches and seizures. The Fifth Amendment ensures due process. But his recitation of basic rights sounded mechanical, like someone reading from a civics textbook, rather than demonstrating deep understanding of how these principles actually limited federal police power. Director Patel. Merkley's voice sharpened with the precision of a surgeon, exposing a vital organ. I'm going to ask you about a specific constitutional principle. Are you familiar with the concept of enumerated powers? The question should have been elementary for someone wielding federal authority, but something in Patel's expression suggested he was entering unfamiliar territory. Senator, enumerated powers refer to the specific authorities granted to different branches of government, Patel responded, his confidence clearly shaken by the realization that he was being tested on fundamental constitutional principles rather than operational FBI matters. Correct? Merkley acknowledged. And since the Constitution only grants the federal government enumerated powers, what does that tell you about FBI authority? The question was designed to test whether Patel understood that federal law enforcement could only exercise powers specifically granted by the Constitution or necessarily implied from those grants. This was the moment when Kash Patel's constitutional ignorance was laid bare for the nation to see. Instead of acknowledging the limited nature of federal power, instead of demonstrating understanding that the FBI could only act within constitutional bounds, Patel gave an answer that would haunt him forever. Senator Patel said with renewed confidence, apparently thinking he was on solid ground, the FBI has broad authority to investigate any crime that affects interstate commerce or national security. We operate under the principle that we can investigate anything that threatens the American people. His voice carried the certainty of someone who believed federal law enforcement power was essentially unlimited as long as it served public safety. The silence that followed was deafening. Merkley stared at Patel with the expression of a constitutional law professor who'd just heard a student claim the First Amendment protected the right to shout fire in a crowded theater. The two law professors behind Merkley exchanged shocked glances. Even the Republican senators looked uncomfortable as they processed what their FBI director had just said. "Director Patel," Merkley said slowly, his voice carrying disbelief that the nation's top law enforcement officer had just demonstrated such fundamental constitutional ignorance. "Did you just say the FBI can investigate anything that threatens the American people?" The question was asked, with the precision of someone wanting to ensure that Patel's devastating answer was clearly on the record. "That's correct," Senator Patel replied, apparently not realizing he'd just advocated for unlimited federal police power that would have horrified the Constitution's framers. "The FBI's mission is protecting America, and we have the authority to investigate any threat to that mission." His confidence in this answer was absolute, revealing a mindset that viewed constitutional limitations as obstacles to overcome, rather than principles to respect. Merkley opened his Constitution and read, "The 10th Amendment states, 'The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution are reserved to the states respectively, or to the people.'" He looked up at Patel. "Doesn't that contradict your claim that the FBI can investigate anything?" Patel's face went pale as his constitutional ignorance was exposed. "Senator, obviously the FBI operates within constitutional bounds," he stammered. "Director Patel," Merkley pressed, "you told Congress the FBI can investigate anything that threatens Americans. Under your interpretation, could the FBI investigate a school board meeting, churches, newspapers?" Each question illustrated the absurd implications of Patel's position. The room watched in stunned silence as America's FBI director realized he'd just advocated for a police state. His earlier confidence had completely evaporated, replaced by visible panic as he grasped the implications of his own words. The man entrusted with protecting constitutional rights had just revealed he didn't understand what those rights actually protected. "Senator," Patel attempted weakly, "obviously we follow constitutional guidelines," but his credibility was already destroyed. How could someone who just demonstrated such fundamental ignorance of constitutional principles be trusted to enforce constitutional law? Merkley delivered the knockout blow with devastating simplicity. "Director Patel, the Constitution you swore to defend explicitly limits federal power to enumerated authorities. You just advocated for unlimited federal police power. Those positions are irreconcilable." The constitutional contradiction was stark and undeniable. The social media explosion was immediate and volcanic. "Constitution fail" began trending within minutes, quickly followed by Patel ignorance and FBI constitutional crisis. Twitter erupted with clips of Patel's admission that he believed the FBI could investigate anything, constitutional scholars providing emergency civics lessons, and constitutional lawyers expressing horror that someone with such fundamental ignorance was leading federal law enforcement. Cable news networks broke into regular programming with breaking FBI director advocates unlimited federal police power banners. Constitutional law professors were rushed into studios to explain why Patel's position was so dangerous to American democracy. Legal experts struggled to find precedent for an FBI director so publicly revealing such basic constitutional ignorance. The immediate aftermath was swift and devastating. Constitutional law organizations issued emergency statements expressing alarm at Patel's demonstrated ignorance. The American Civil Liberties Union called for his immediate resignation, stating that someone who didn't understand constitutional limitations couldn't be trusted to respect them. Bar associations began questioning whether Patel's law license should be subject to review. Republican senators who'd supported Patel's nomination found themselves in impossible positions. How do you defend an FBI director who just advocated for unlimited federal police power? Senator Rand Paul, a constitutional conservative, issued a statement saying he was deeply disturbed by Patel's apparent belief that constitutional limitations didn't apply to the FBI. The FBI itself was thrown into crisis as agents realized their director didn't understand the constitutional foundation of their authority. Veteran agents who'd spent careers carefully operating within constitutional bounds were horrified to learn their leader believed those bounds didn't exist. Field offices began requesting clarification on whether existing constitutional protocols remained in effect. Law schools began using his testimony as a case study in constitutional ignorance. Within a week, constitutional lawyers' approval of Patel hit 0%. The Senate announced constitutional competency hearings. Patel's media appearances ceased, as his staff realized he was a constitutional liability in any setting. 6 months later, facing continued scrutiny and plummeting credibility, Patel quietly resigned. The FBI's new director was required to undergo extensive constitutional law briefings, a requirement implemented specifically because of Patel's demonstrated ignorance. Merkley's 29-second constitutional lesson became legendary as an example of how simple questions could expose fundamental ignorance. The Oregon senator had demonstrated that constitutional knowledge wasn't optional for federal officials. Years later, Patel's exchange with Merkley was cited as evidence of how dangerous constitutional ignorance could be in positions of power. His belief that the FBI could investigate anything represented exactly the unlimited government authority the Constitution was designed to prevent. The pocket constitution that Merkley placed on the witness table became a symbol of accountability. Students learned that taking an oath to defend the Constitution required actual understanding, not just ceremonial words. Sometimes the most powerful weapon against governmental overreach isn't a lawsuit or protest. It's a simple question about constitutional authority, asked by someone who understands the answer. 29 seconds of constitutional ignorance proved that even FBI directors must understand the document they've sworn to defend.